All right, says that we are live. So welcome everybody. It's been a while since I've been live, since I've had a show. So it's good to see everybody. Hopefully, give you guys a few minutes to come on in. I am back. Got Allison back, independent researcher Allison McDowell. We've had several shows with her last year, and we're today talking about a bunch of stuff. This one is framed around evolved eugenics, and so hopefully you guys will join us for what will be a very important conversation. So make sure you guys hit the thumbs up button and share this in your network because we really want all of you to be a part of the conversation. So make sure you share it. We're going to be talking about this and talking about how some of the evolved stuff is sort of targeting African Americans and African American women specifically, and so hopefully we'll be able to, after talking with Allison and looking at her research, we'll be able to kind of see through like some of the what I call propaganda because that's really what it is, right? So we want to give you guys a few minutes to come on in. And share. Why don't you guys let me know where you're looking at us from? So, what city and state, or if you are international, let us know what country you're watching us from. If you could put that in the comments. I always like to see what part of the country people are from, or what part of the world people are watching us from. So, hopefully, you guys will hit the like button and share. So, Allison, it's been a while. I mean, you and I talk like
Yeah.
on Twitter and we talk sometimes on the phone, but it's just been a while since you and I have both like talked on a show. So, what have you been up to?
Wow. Well, I've been doing a lot of research since January around this global brain project, this
Wow.
world sensorium. So I might read a little passage out of that.
Oh
But
my God.
yeah, and it links into we went in March to this Mormon transhumanist conference to try to get.
Transhumanist. Wow.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So that organization has existed since 2006. They have their own YouTube channel, so you should check them out. And the reason that I was really interested in actually showing up in person was that the whole focus was on blockchain
Hmm.
and decentralization, right? Liberation through decentralization. And these are people who I think in many respects would be considered probably a fringe identity within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And yet, if you look at the amount of resources that the church has access to, a lot of them are actually aligned with technology and biotechnology.
Wow.
So, and one of the two keynote speakers, his name is Tamika Tillemann. And when I saw that, that's when I knew, like, okay, we need to actually show up because his background was he was high level State Department staff
The
under
State Department. So the U.S.
the U.S.
Department of
State
State.
Department, yes,
Okay.
under Clinton. And then he was at New America, which is a sort of a centrist think tank backed by a lot of Eric Schmidt and Google money. And so he was a key person in establishing social impact investing and digital identity. Okay, so like, okay. And then he moved on from that position to Andreessen Horowitz, which is a very significant venture capital firm. And Mark Andreessen has sort of asserted this idea that the real world will never be fixed or just, and therefore we just need to build the metaverse, and that's where we will have our social justice is in this programmed world. And then recently, I think as of January, he moved on to another sort of a spin-off out of Andreessen Horowitz that is involved directly with blockchain. And so when I saw that Tamika Tillemann, someone with this amount of status, right, is keynoting a conference that it is openly identified with transhumanism, I wanted to make sure that we were in the room and to see, where things were going, especially because it was a blockchain conference, right? And so I think many people think transhumanism and they're imagining, that I'm going to get a Neuralink or some surgical intervention. But really, I think in the first round, the transhumanist program is actually around digital twinning and the creation of predictive models for
So the
impact investing.
So to be clear, the digital twin means that basically you'll have um, sort of a clone, if you will, of a person, but digitally. Is that right?
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
just trying to like explain
No,
this
no,
like in
no. It's
layman's
really
terms
important.
for people.
Right. Well, see, and I think in some ways we probably already have our digital dust all over the places, and they're using different pots of this dust to make, entertainment recommendations or education recommendations or, fitness recommendations. Like all of these recommendation engines have access to some of the data, but really what they want is to create a single digital identity that's interoperable so that they know how much Netflix you're watching versus how many steps you're taking. They want to compare all of those things. And so once they can advance this digital identity, that's where things get interesting from their standpoint, is that they can actually build out very robust twinning mechanisms for, I think, initially predictive profiling that will feed these impact markets, because they'll say, okay, based on your twin, we predict this is your future behavior, wellness behavior, intellectual behavior, social behavior, and we would like to modulate you to fit our expectations. So what do we have to do to get you to agree to that, right? To agree to these behaviors. And we
I think
preferably we'd like
this
you to
lady is
agree to the
brilliant.
behavior.
Yes, she is Mr. Untouchable. We're glad to have her back.
That you'll go along, right? They don't actually want people to fight back. They would like for you to willingly or whatever, just give up and do what they say. And so this is all about the Internet of Things and Internet of Bodies technologies, much of which is deeply embedded in Salt Lake City. And I would encourage, and maybe we can put a link later on. We did field visits all over Salt Lake City and also into Colorado, sort of identifying, okay, this is where they're working on neural prosthetics for the past 30 years. This is where they're working on mental health interventions in MRI magnetics to tease apart your neurons. This is where the original, decimation of the indigenous people by Brigham Young's cavalry happened. Like, these layers of history are all interconnected, and then we need to sort of actually see how they're layered. So again, we show up at the conference, and the first speakers, they had some people who were running for office, and the first one was Evan McMullen, which I was not familiar with, but evidently he ran an independent campaign for president, and he's former Wharton, so Philadelphia business guy, and CIA, right? And so I'm standing up, and I'm like,
I knew the CIA was a part of it. I just knew it.
Right. No, well, see, the thing is, that the mixed reality, that the Niantic backed, Pokemon Go, and that was InQtel money, that was CIA money. And so the out of the hopper, because they were recording it for paid people who were doing remote broadcasts. And so we had to go to the mics, and I go up to the mic and I said, so Mr. McMullen, how does this work with when your mixed reality is feeding social impact markets and it has ties to state intelligence, right? I mean, because he's framing it like his platform is sort of deregulation for business friendly deregulation. And he just stands up there and is like, well, I haven't really thought about it, which may be true. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure they're paid not to think too hard about it, right? I mean, that's how they advance. So anyway, that was our March. And before that, I actually had done a pretty in-depth investigation into what's called conditional cash transfers. And
tell us what that is. Conditional cash transfers.
Right. And so conditional cash transfers were piloted in Mexico, and pre-digital currency. This was in the this was right after NAFTA, right? So crash the Mexican economy. Already a impoverished country, put more people into poverty, pull out the tortilla subsidy, and then force people into accepting public assistance that's conditional. And Mexico had very, very high levels of conditions for, if you were going to get this subsidy, which I believe is a direct predecessor to UBI, you will do what we say in terms of health interventions for you and your child, both prenatally and after birth and as children, both medical interventions and nutritional supplements, which in the most of this was being underwritten by the Inter-American Development Bank and studied by academics in the US, Berkeley, Penn, Yale. And they were all, because this was the test bed, right? And even in their reports, they said, well, we realized that there wasn't a positive impact on the iron supplement because we realized that it wasn't working because the formulation wasn't right and it wasn't being absorbed, but it wasn't hurting anything, and we could use it to get them to do what we wanted. So we just didn't do anything for 5 years. And they're writing this in their official reports. And I'm thinking, what in the world was actually going on with that iron supplement, right? What was actually in that they were like, oh, by the way, it doesn't work, but we're still going to give it to the kids. I mean, beyond that, yeah, maybe they could use it to influence behavior, but was there something else going on in that iron supplement? Because, once we know about the history of people, feeding kids in foster care institutions irradiated oatmeal and so on and so forth, right? Like problems. And so those were the conditions. It was health conditions and education. So you had to send your child to school and they tracked attendance. And then some
That's
of it was
a big thing now. There's entire organizations that want to force compulsory, like going to school. And then I think you and I may have talked about this, but thankfully it was shut down because there were a bunch of parents that really went off. But there was this symposium that was going to happen at Harvard about the horrors of homeschooling.
Yeah.
And we should outlaw parents from homeschooling and force them to send their kids to public schools. That got shut down, thankfully, because parents organized like, what the fuck? You know what I mean? Like, how are you going to take homeschooling away? But yeah,
Right.
Go ahead.
No, well, actually, Michael Bloomberg was involved in this as well. And so in 2007, he took that program and he brought it to New York. And it was around, I think it was called like Opportunity Works or something like that. And again, it was around education. And it only lasted for like a year. And people kept saying, wait a minute, New York City is not Mexico, rural Mexico. I'm sorry. Like, what were you thinking, Michael? But no one is actually putting together that this is part of a multi-decade program, right? Because the other element that they were really focused on in Mexico was the logistics of getting this condition-based assistance into the hands of people who were unbanked. Because that's the loop, is they need all of these people who are pursuing an informal economic system that are off the books and unregulated to get on the blockchain, right? And so, again, we're talking mid to late 1990s there, but
they want to get rid of cash.
Yes.
There's a prediction that will be a cashless society by like 2033.
Right. And see, what I think my frustration with a lot of these conversations around the cashless society is, so the World Bank, and I consolidated these two presentations I did into a blog post with the slide deck and a link to the World Bank, their slide deck in 2014 that says, first you start out with an unconditional transfer. You just give them money. Then you roll out the conditions.
And that's what they're doing in cities across the country now. Oakland has rolled it out.
Totally.
Yeah.
So I was trying to link the Mexico program to the Oakland program because the What's Left podcast, they were based in the Bay Area in Oakland. And so making this link, because for the most part, what I hear around the cashless, it's limited to central bank digital currency, which is not the case. Any of this digital currency can be programmed. And the plan is to actually create free markets in human capital. So it's going to not just be central bank digital currency. It'll be any digital currency. And two, they're not looking at the fact that this 2014 World Bank proposal said at that time, and at this point, now that's 8 years ago, 70 countries had this program and tens of millions of families were already connected into this conditional cash transfer system. And now they are transitioning it from, initially in the late 90s, because a lot of these rural communities, it was targeting impoverished people largely in the southern part of Mexico whose communities didn't have banking systems. And so it was through debit cards. There was stuff around like know your customer. How do you prove who you are to use this benefit? Because then there's the whole feeding into the welfare mom, like the whole Reagan, welfare queen scenario. Oh, you need to make sure those poor people aren't misusing their benefit. And so getting the tech, and now the tech is ready to be linked up into these blockchain wallets for universal basic income. And And my frustration is that given the scale of these programs, and that many folks are, who talk about the finance side of this should know better and be able to frame it within a global South poverty management context, that story isn't really getting out. No one's saying, well, hey, where did this idea of programmable money and social control come from? Oh yeah, that's right. We've been doing it for 30 years on other people's kids, at least in the US. So that's sort of what I worked on in January. And then I did, because one of the folks from What's Left, his family's in Mexico. So he had gone back and spent some time. And then we said, hey, we should talk about this publicly. So it's literally a 6-hour presentation with about 100 slides. And you know me, I'm always a long form, but people need to know this doesn't come out of nowhere. And I think if you can frame, unfortunately, there was just recently like a breaking like news thing from Vice about Anarchapulco that was used in my consideration to frame those of us who have concerns around global currencies, oppressive strategies as flaky, hippie, selfish, expat people in the tropics partying and all of that layered into the bigger resistance strategy. And I said, that's a problem, because if we can't frame our narrative that it's not that we're just selfish jerks, who are out to party in tropical locales, but we're actually here to try to take care of vulnerable communities and address that, then it's going to be a problem. We're never going to be in the right story. So that's what I'm trying to put forward. And then additionally, I've been looking at cybernetics and programming. How do you program society? How do you program people? Going back to World War II and the Macy conferences and
what's cybernetics? What does that mean?
Well, so cybernetics was developed in alignment with computing during the 1940s, and Norbert Wiener, and actually a Mexican physiologist, Arturo Rosenbluth, they were key people in like developing mathematical models for military purposes, like anti-aircraft guns, and then using the algorithms that they refined for military weapons to apply them to the physiology of living things. And so there is this very direct connection between studying the physiology of cognition to the creation of artificial intelligence neural nets. And it goes way back. You wouldn't imagine that this was already happening, in the 30s and 40s, but that's where all of this biophysics, synthetic biology comes from. And that literally what we're going to talk about later with eugenics is we are reaching a point at which engineers imagine that they can literally program life through computer assisted design, like a molecular model. And this is where it all came from. So to me, it feels like a colonizing project and a eugenics project. And, what I was saying, when they want to build this world brain, this is 1946. And this guy, Oliver Reiser, he was the chair of philosophy at Pittsburgh, and he was working with Julius Stolman, who was his crew helped establish the state of Israel, and Fritz Kunst, and he was the head of theosophy in North America, and all of these Ivy League people. Is that when they build the world brain, my sense is that it's not going to be black. It's not going to be a black or brown world brain. It's going to be a homogenized classical antiquity world brain that's like the extension of this Fabian eugenics project. Only I think they really want the Black community's buy-in, and it's going to happen through the metaverse, the blockchain metaverse. So anyway, that's what I'm trying to deconstruct, and I appreciate your audience.
Absolutely. And the unfortunate thing is that they're getting a lot of us through the cryptocurrency and the that whole, decent. So there's a brother out there, 19 Keys. Folks who listen to this, they know who he is. He's actually, he's a great person. I just don't think that he knows this larger issue, because he actually said this. And I remember a friend of mine, Amawale, he actually told me, he said he felt like the metaverse would get rid of racism. And I was like, what? I was like, he said that?
Well, it might get rid of race. That's actually what they want.
Yeah, right. I mean, just get rid of the whole, So I think that that's where they're getting a lot of our folks, because there's this, there's this want and need to want to be rich, to want to,
Or even safe. Right now, people
yeah,
are just like, I just want to make sure
NFTs.
my family's okay.
Right, exactly. So people are doing the NFTs, all of that stuff. So,
but they
yeah,
don't know
it's
about
very
Oliver
concerning.
Reiser. I'm here to say you guys got to get this book, get it out of the library. Can I read this page to you? So this is page 187. You can see I'm like marking this whole thing up. And it's called The Birthing of the World Brain. Okay, so this is 1946. The world brain is a supranational social structure which has the following specific functions. Number one, to make possible a world community where political security is protected by a world intelligence service, a world police force, and air patrol able to move into action at an hour's notice. Okay. To bring into being a functional society, which can begin at once a world program of food distribution, because that's these conditional cash transfers. They want to control food. With a controlled world transport and communication system under a world price control using the network of thousands of small community organizations on every continent as auxiliaries for rehabilitation, education, and broad cooperative action generally.
NGOs.
Right. And nobody left out, right? You're going to get the littlest, no little group can be off working outside of the global network. It all has to be absorbed.
Can you drop the title to that again?
Yeah. So it's the World Sensorium, the Social Embryology of World Federation, 1946.
This was written in 1946.
Yes. And these ideas date at least to 1941. Julius Stolman was developing this in 1941 with Western Reserve, actually, which I think much of this goes back to Rockefeller. And I didn't realize that he grew up in Cleveland. So to me,
yes, there's Rockefeller stuff everywhere in Cleveland. I was born in Cleveland. I just came back from visiting family there, literally about a month ago.
Very interesting.
There's Rockefeller stuff everywhere there.
So in number 3, so it's to provide a means for economic global planning so that material security, food, shelter, clothing, and medicine are guaranteed to all, while a broad nutrition and World Health Service eliminate preventable disease. So that's the nutrition supplement, right? That's the World Food Program. But again, it's aligned with the Rockefeller, like the Codex Alimentarius, which is controlling global food standards. And a lot of the global food standards are...
They're doing that now. They're blowing up. They're blowing up food distribution centers, meat centers. They've killed 5 million birds. There's a coming food crisis that I'm really afraid that people in America aren't ready for. Like we're so used to having like grocery stores full of food, and if you have money, you can go get it, right? But and then you have, I'm sure you've heard of Bill Gates buying up a lot of the land in the country. Like, he's forced, or well, I guess not really forced, but he offered them a price that they couldn't refuse, farmers to burn crops. So what you're reading is literally happening, like as we're talking about this. It's happening now in real time.
Right. And then even what counts as food changes, like by this codex, it's for global trade. And I have a friend, my friend Deepti in India. She was saying that quite a few years ago, the World Health Organization took over control of Ayurvedic medicine. So there's control of like non-traditional, like healing products as well. So that's, So here's number 4, to provide a universal theory and system of education. All right. So one global education, everybody learns the same thing. You can imagine who would want to be in charge of that, right? Administered so far as possible by local personnel, thus protecting our new social concepts and freeing men's minds from prejudices calculated to warp our judgment. So this is definitely the thought police version, right? And again, they will probably say that we're going to program you the right way, like so you will be not racist.
Did you see that Homeland Security has an information council? Did you see that shit?
I've heard. I haven't read up on it yet, but
Homeland Security.
This is like 1946, right? Yeah,
It's
right.
unconstitutional.
And then I would say this is why I appreciate talking to your audience. There are a lot of folks who can't imagine their own government doing this to them, right? Because they've never experienced this level of totalitarian control. But I'm like, no, we actually have to come to grips with what the US actually is.
Exactly.
And then number 5 is to establish an order of priority in introducing new social changes. All right. So you create the crises and then you introduce the social change, which is also going to be the climate narrative. After establishing a method for testing the essential validity of any project by its code of principle, it will be possible to assist in the promotion of any intellectual or social movement which is humanistically sound, or the isolation of any proposal which is deemed ill-advised or deliberately anti-humanistic in its tendency. So they're just saying they're going to control all of the messaging. And it is not necessary here to explain the philosophy behind the program, since the entire volume is attempting to do this. But in order to give some more concrete indication of what scientific humanism means, we shall outline the applications of the approach. And then it goes on. But so they're looking for a uniform. I mean, it is the one New World Order, but I would say, I feel like in many respects, even over time, that whole idea, like the phrasing of the New World Order, like if you say that, they're like, oh, I'm putting you in this box, right? Oh, I know that box. That's this box. Here you go. Like I can discount you and I don't actually have to talk about this because you're one of those wacky people, right? And, for a while back, there was actually was it Barney Miller? Like there was an episode clip of Barney Miller where the guy's going, no, it's the Trilateral Commission and it's all these connected people. And we're like, oh, look, he knew back in the 70s, they all knew. But even conditionally, it's like, haha, no, that's just on TV. I think there's been a very specific long-term plan around the conspiracy and truth movement to be able to marginalize, right? And so when people who maybe weren't even necessarily identified as part of that come in with saying like, no, actually this guy is important. He there's a whole philosophy that this underlies synthetic biology and eugenics and where this is coming. People just put up, no, I'm not going to look at that. I'm not going to look at that. And anyway, I feel like it's important to talk about. So that's why I appreciate you being willing to talk today about.
No, this is really all, it's all important. I mean, I feel like to some extent people, there's, like you said, they dismiss people and label people conspiracy theorists and stuff like that. And then I'm always like, yeah, but most of the time the conspiracy theorists have been right, about certain stuff. But what I love about like your research is like you actually like go back like for decades, like and able to find primary sources where they're talking about this shit openly.
Yesterday. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Well, I mean, like most of us, like I've never heard of that book. Like they're not talking about that on college campuses and getting students to actually think. Not, they're telling students in universities how to think, not and what to think. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because people come out of the universities and they're totally programmed. Like,
I know.
Yeah, like
my kid who doesn't like me anymore, right? I mean, and that's why control of the education system and the food systems are so important because they need to, that's the programming. It's straight up programming and then increasingly even potentially with frequencies and things with these devices and capturing our emotions and feeding it back as these feedback loops.
Yep.
And so, if you go back, yesterday I was spending a lot of time looking into actually 18th century political thought around utilitarianism, positivism, this idea of disconnecting. Like the idea of positivism is that you're only allowed to consider through logic and science and your senses, and that anything that might be mystical or religious, that has to be taken off. Like that's not marginalized. You can't do that anymore. Even though now we know that the world is much beyond what we can actually perceive with our regular senses. And we're developing tools to look into other things that like to expand the reach of our senses. But that was done with a very intentional way of disconnecting you from a spiritual, from the noosphere, from the consciousness. And a lot of folks were looking at Jeremy Bentham And he actually developed the idea of the panopticon, and he influenced, I live in a part of the city of Philadelphia where we have Eastern State Penitentiary. That is an example. It's a prison with this panopticon. It's a National Historic Landmark. And the idea of self-policing, that you may always be under, you don't know when you're going to be under surveillance, which is what they're building with this digital panopticon. But additionally, he was like promoted sort of as a social reformer. He's like, oh, I love women's rights and I love animals, but I think we should have quotients where we can actually have a moral law, but it will be a universal moral law, which I think will be connected to the blockchain, right? And so the HAL 9000 will be doing your law, and it will be moral. We will decide what is moral. He also talked about management of pauperism, like workhouses, because a lot of this is baked into the good poor, right? The labor regulations. He was connected to happiness. So he would say, here are these measures, these metrics of 14 things of happiness and 12 things of pain, and any action should be evaluated for its sort of like wellness measure. And I can totally see this now, because some of the people behind the Global Brain Project, one of them working with Fritz Kunst, his name was Peter.
I'm sorry, the Global Brain Project? You got to unpack that.
I call it like the World Brain Project, the World Sensorium. It is like literally the global brain. They're working on the global brain. But yeah, this guy, Pitcharim Sorobkin, he was the head of applied sociology at Harvard. And Eli Lilly, the pharmaceutical company, paid money for him to have his own center at Harvard for creative altruism. And so it was all about measuring everything. And then today, so many of these connections with Bentham reflect today. So today there's something called Richard Layard, who is behind authentic happiness and wellness and measurement, but for impact investing, for social engineering purposes. The universal law, there's something called ULEX, which is what the blockchain people want to do, shopping cart, open law on a shelf. And we're going to create with geofencing special economic zones that tech companies can set up their own towns in countries like Honduras, just make up their own laws and pick up shopping cart, laws off the books and just automate everything. And it's overwhelming to me because, and this isn't even deep research. I'm just like Wikipedia, the next person, who was their mentor, the next person, and you just walk it back. So it didn't, yeah, Roz Ben is great. And he says they lay it all out in the artwork. They tell you, he's always insisting that Ben Franklin opened the gates of hell in Philadelphia. And I'm like, well, yeah, I haven't found anything that dissuades me of that fact so far.
So you sent me a couple videos and a couple images. So which one should we tee up first to kind of bring this conversation about how eugenics is connected to this?
Yeah. Well, why don't we do the 1 minute one first, the Dominic Cummins one?
Okay, let me find that. Just a second. Just pull that one up.
So, and I'll just for a preface. So Dominic Cummings was an advisor to Boris Johnson in the UK. He was behind the creation of sort of like a skunkworks tech R&D. This clip was taken from a hearing, like a multi-hour hearing last year. It was like a 4-hour hearing. But he has his own blog, and I had found his stuff earlier where he was actually asserting that education should be based on a student's genomic profile. Okay. Wow. So it's very directly like, okay, we know who you are. We'll give you your personalized learning. And this was just a 1 minute clip where a woman, I'm presuming was an elected official, was asking him a question in this hearing about eugenics.
Okay, let me see if I can share my screen, and I will. So share system audio, and I think this is it. Yeah. All right, so I will make that big.
Do you consider eugenics to be a science, and do you think it needs more research?
I don't really know what you mean by eugenics. There's obviously a huge amount of work now going on in genomics, in understanding how the genome works. And there's a huge amount of work happening in genetic engineering and technologies like CRISPR, which have both huge promise and also huge potential disasters. I certainly think that one of Britain's great scientific advantages is our leadership in this field, in genomics, genetic engineering, things like that. It's proved that advantage has proved extremely valuable in COVID, because I think we've been one of, if not possibly even the leading scientific country in sequencing different variants of COVID. So I strongly think that fundamental science research should be funded here.
Thank you. Why?
So I don't really know what you mean by
push him
eugenics.
on the eugenics piece.
Another person.
She didn't push him on the eugenics.
No,
Like
she kind of backed off. She didn't make it too hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
There it is.
But at least somebody put it in the conversation, right? It's in the record. So again, so much of this is like the language we use. And that's something I, when I was talking with the What's Left folks earlier this week, and I wasn't really familiar with it, but Andy was saying that people on the left generally don't talk about eugenics.
No.
They frame that eugenics is something like libertarians talk about, but it's not something that the left talks about.
The left doesn't talk about it also because Margaret Sanger is connected to it and they beloved the Planned Parenthood. So they try not to talk about it. For years, they framed it as a right-wing talking point, and then they finally admitted and just said, we're sorry, but Planned Parenthood is still a good organization.
Right. And so, but I think this idea, and this was what was connected to the conditional cash transfers, is the idea that there is some idea in people's heads of what a good family looks like, a good baby looks like, a good child looks like. And generally those are the people who have the resources, who are often not from the country, right? I mean, Cummings, he is saying that this is, to me, it's straight up, this is an imperial project. This is a crown project, right? Mm-hmm. That there is a standard, and that's what cybernetics espouses, is it's actually something called like Kubernetes, like a Roman boat, that you're steering a boat towards a lighthouse and that you'll get pushed off course by wind or waves and you get back on course. And that's the cybernetic. It's a feedback loop, like a thermostat. Like you've got an end, the thermostat sets the temperature, it goes up or down, and it brings it back to the middle till you get to the destination. And within a cybernetic construct, there's some lighthouse out there, which is interesting because a lot of these schools are framed as lighthouse schools, and that someone has decided what the optimum embodiment is, right? That there is one, that the global brain, wants one unitary consciousness. And what does that look like? And if it's the people coming from an imperial construct, I don't think that's going to work out well for Black and brown communities. And unfortunately, many people have been placed in a position to say the metaverse is going to be social justice. The metaverse is going to offer us employment. The STEM and science and getting your kids, getting them in a good school that's going to get them in a good college that's going to teach them to be a bioengineer. Like, that's the way through this. Like, that's how we can compete in this world. And what I'm saying is this planned world is actually fully post-human. And not just post-human, but post-natural life, period. Because everything they're planning for people, they're planning for. Say
that again. I think that's so important. It's post-human and post-natural life.
Yeah, it's all synthetic. Literally, the capitalist imperative, the imperial imperative is to make life synthetic so that you can extract more value and that you can continue to control. And in many respects, these people who are advancing the World Brain Program, this eugenics program, they imagine that there is an evolutionary imperative, that this is evolutionary and that there's an imperative to get beyond our material selves. Wow. And in doing that, it essentially says that we will jettison culture, language, foodways, traditions, religions, everything is out the door into some sort of unity of electro-digital consciousness. And for me, again, while I understand the structural problems among races, among nations, I don't think that our goal should be to erase the difference. We need to learn to acknowledge difference, respect difference, make amends for past problems that were created under the name of empire, but not just to do a reboot and start over as a digital, some sort of digital layer, the Matrix, right? Like that's not, I don't think that's what most people would want, but we're not talking about it like that.
That's so true. We're not talking about it like that. Very few people like you. There's another brother thankfully there's another African-American guy based in Los Angeles. He's been talking about this from that perspective. And I want to ask you this and get your thoughts. One of the things that he said is that he doesn't think they'll be successful with the singularity. He said he ultimately just does not believe that it's going to happen. What do you think?
I mean, I would agree with that.
Okay.
But I would say for me, this does feel like an engagement of the sacred versus the profane.
Okay.
Right? There is a duality there. And that whether it's the ancestors, God, faith, that there is a test being laid out before us.
Right.
And not everyone understands what it is. But some of us do.
Right.
And you do understand it and you can see it. How do you engage with it? How do you position yourself in the struggle? Right? Knowing that, and to me, I think it relates to frequency, it relates to energetics. I'm not a nihilist, none of this, but I don't think it's that, like I had someone and I was very frustrated because I did these 6-hour, multi-hour presentations to lay it out.
Yeah.
And they said, well, I think you're just manifesting this by talking about it.
Oh my God.
Kind of like, you should just be with your kids and not think about it. Like that was kind of and they said that they appreciated it, but they're like, well, you're just making it by looking at it. See, to me, I don't feel that way. I don't feel like for me to ignore this or not talk about it, that somehow it would just go poof and not. I'm not saying everybody has to approach it the way I approach it, but
sure.
I don't think that, to me, it feels like a test, like a spiritual test. Mm-hmm. And then you respond with to me, because my friend Cliff, which I've learned a lot from him, he talks about what do you put out? Do you go to war with it? Because I think it wants an aggressive, because it can use your energy. If you go to war with it, it wants to capture that. It actually gets that energy. But if you can find a way to position yourself in a way that you can neutralize it, that's where I feel like we're at. But neutralize it not from a place of ignoring it, but to engage meaningfully and put yourself between it and that future. Anyway, so that's where I'm at. I don't think they'll do it, but I don't think that we can afford to simply not engage.
Right.
I mean, clearly other people have differences of opinion. I don't think you can run from it. I think there are people who imagine, I'm like, well, if you understand the weaponized atmosphere, directed energy weapons, frequency weapons.
Can you go into that a little bit more? Because I've heard people sort of tangentially talk about frequency and frequency as a weapon. What does that mean? Is it a laser that just gonna zap you and then it changes? You know what I mean? Can you unpack that a little bit for the listeners?
Well, I mean, I'm still looking. I mean, really, all you have to do is go on the Lockheed or Raytheon website and put directed energy weapons, and poof, there's a whole bunch, right? And they used to be on
What's
ships.
the website?
Lockheed, just look up Lockheed or
and Raytheon, which are military contractors.
Yeah, and Raytheon, actually, Vannevar Bush, who I don't think is related to that Bush family, but is his own. He was an MIT chair of engineering during World War II. He actually created Raytheon in the 1920s. This goes way back.
Wow.
And he then, after the Second World War, he ran MIT's radiation lab, microwave radiation radar. And then he's founded the National Science Foundation, right? So here we are, right? There's this direct connection. And so there's lasers that they can put on the back of a Jeep and run around and what they say is they laser drones, right? So if the US military needs them to laser down drone swarms. And so that's how they talk about using it. But once you have the laser, whether you're pointing it up or down, like you can use it for things, right? And then the other piece is frequency, because I would say there's a really interesting book, and I have a couple of clips on my YouTube channel. It's this woman, oh gosh, is it Jessica Conant? She wrote a book called Tuxedo Park Labs. And it was about this man named Alfred Loomis. And actually in the lead up to World War II, we weren't supposed to get involved in the war. We hadn't declared war, but they knew they wanted to align the scientific research. So the Manhattan Project and the Rad Lab and a number of other projects were started with private financing, really, because they couldn't use public money because it wasn't authorized yet. And they were just coming out of the Depression. So the academic institutions didn't have the money. And then Loomis, he had made all of this money in trading electrical utility holding companies. And he just so happened, he and his brother-in-law, to pull out all their money right before the stock market crashed and put it in cash, right? Imagine that. And so he was like one of the only people who made money during the Depression. And he actually loved physics. And so he built this whole physics lab, a private lab in Tuxedo Park, New York, which is about 40 minutes outside of the city, to run physics experiments. And he would go to Europe and court the highest level theoretical physicists, Einstein and all of this crowd, and give them steamer tickets to come here to the US and wine and dine them and have them meet all the most elite people, including the Harrimans, who were connected to, his mother was funding the eugenics records office, come in and like say, hey, let's do physics in my private lab, right? And so like this stuff has been like, they've been working on frequency stuff since the 30s. And this woman, Conant, she was the granddaughter of James Conant, who was the head of Harvard and later did things in Germany after the war and became head of this education commission. But she wrote this biography of her uncle, who actually was a chemist. It was a great uncle at this lab for 15 years, and then wrote a book called Brainwaves and Death. I think that was Brainwaves and Death. And a month before it was published, he committed suicide. Oh, and his twin brother committed suicide. Suspicious circumstances. And so there's
committed suicide. Let's do that. Yeah.
Right. What they said, it was like a lightly fictionalized novel of what was going on in this lab in the late 20s and early 30s. And poof, he's gone, right? And so actually I have a link to the Brainwaves and Death PDF, and I haven't read it yet, but you know, I'm not overwhelmed, because I do think that like some of us are supposed to do some stuff here, like not like go to war stuff, but tell the truth. What is this country? This country is a place where very rich people who manage trading for electrical companies in conjunction with people who are setting up eugenics offices are working on electronic microwave frequencies that now ripple through our science research into today. And now we have to talk about eugenics. So maybe you can play up the next the 4-minute clip.
Yeah, I can pull that up now. Let me just share my screen again.
So I'll just tell you so one of my the people I connected with early on in trying to work out what was going on in public education was based in Maine.
Yeah.
So Maine has actually been a center for a lot of this stuff. And again, I think like it's definitely racialized, but there's also a class thing. And I think they do want to keep people polarized. And so Maine has been.
I'm sorry. Hold on. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Keep talking.
That's okay. For a lot of programs, because it has a very elite resort, people, very, very wealthy, connected people have second homes in Maine and have been since these 1920s. And but most of the population is pretty poor, like rural poor people. And so it's been a test bed for a lot of these technological interventions. One of the first one-to-one laptop deployments was in Maine, statewide.
Here's her YouTube channel, everybody, and her backup YouTube channel. So everybody, this is Allison McDowell. If you're just joining the conversation, thanks for asking, Robert Nelson. Her name is Allison McDowell. She's an independent researcher and just an overall really good person, sharing all of this information with us. And a lot of y'all are vibing with it. Like a lot of y'all are kind of like, like, oh, I've been knowing about this, and yes, she's telling the truth. So this is, and now she's teeing up this clip, and I'm gonna let you finish, Allison. She's teeing up this clip that it's a 4-minute clip that you guys are gonna listen to, but she's teeing it up, letting us know sort of some background about it. So there you go.
So anyway, I still have a few connections in Maine. It's hard because, again, a lot of people in the education space have just lost their minds. They don't understand. They lost the plot, right? But there's still a few people. And so this longer talk came on my radar. And this is David Rue, and he is actually one of the primary benefactors of an institution in Maine called Jackson Laboratory. And Jackson Laboratory dates back to the 1930s. And this lab was initially found, I forgot the gentleman's name, but it was a mouse breeding lab for research. And the gentleman who got it started, he was connected to Planned Parenthood. He was connected to the American Eugenics Society. He was, for briefly, the president back in the 30s at the University of Maine and then the University of Michigan. And then I think people got weirded out by the research. And so then he pulled out of academics, and then he started this lab. And there's actually an offshoot of the Jackson Lab in Connecticut. And when I was doing research around the Institute for New Economic Thinking, which is backed largely by George Soros to catalyze this new cybernetic UBI social programming system, one of the other major funders was this gentleman named Bill Janeway, and his wife, Wesley Janeway, was funding Jackson Lab as well. And she actually, it's quite strange because the foundation they set up to do the funding was called the Pyewacket Foundation. And if you look up Pyewacket, actually, because it's in the movie Bell Book and Candle, and it was a cat. And I think actually one of my aunts had a cat named Pyewacket. But if you go back, it was a witch's familiar. Like during these early witch trials that were written up, like Pyewacket was a cat that was a witch's familiar. So that someone would choose for this eugenics-based program to call the foundation Pyewacket is just unusual to me. So you can look it up. Wesley Janeway, an amateur geneticist operating in Connecticut through Pyewacket Labs. And then David Rue is also a major benefactor today of this lab. And this is a talk from 2018. He's giving it to the University of New England, I think it is, which is in Portland, Maine. And he's talking about essentially genetic engineering and some of the ethical implications of managed breeding for the human population to change the human germline. And to me, it sounds pretty much like straight up
managed breeding. Oh my God, like we fucking dogs or something. Like this
or
is
mice, yeah,
or mice, dogs or mice. Yeah, this is. So a couple of people said they wish more people were on this watching. Well, please share. If you're watching this, hit the like button and share. Y'all know how these algorithms work. My channel.
They don't like me.
Oh yeah, my channel shadow banned too. So in order to really get this out to people, you have to do it organically. Like you have to physically share it yourself. You have to actually hit the like button and make comments, and which you guys all are doing anyway. But we're gonna go ahead and play this 4-minute clip. Allison has told us a little bit of background about these people, this man specifically, and it's
and he's with Silver Lake Capital.
Silver Lake Capital. Let's go ahead and hit play. Just a second. Let me get back to it. There we go.
14% of people are employed there, and it's about 18% of GDP.
Oh, let me go back. Sorry.
A little pricey. Not only is it the largest sector, healthcare is the largest sector of the economy. 14% of people are employed there, and it's about 18% of GDP because the things they do there are a little pricey. Not only is it the largest sector of the economy, it is the fastest growing sector of the economy. Many people believe that the last big thing in healthcare took place in 1850. Louis Pasteur, germ theory, and basically the whole idea that when you get sick, it's little bugs that are causing the problem. All right, it's not the miasma in the air. Now, to be fair, I'm kind of overstating to make a point. Vaccines have been pretty helpful, anesthesia pretty helpful, Antibiotics, fantastic. Birth control pills. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that have come along that have been terrific, but they are not, I would not describe them as platform technologies on which great waves of innovation then happened. The fuse, it was a long fuse, got lit in 1953 when Watson and Crick discovered the double helix in DNA. Aha, here is the software that controls who we are, how we grow, and how we replicate. And finally, in 2003, we sequenced the genome simply being all of your genes and all the underlying DNA. The budget for that was $3 billion to sequence the first genome. Last year, you can sequence the genome for $1,000. Our understanding of the human body is now computational. We understand digitally what is going on. It becomes just like the semiconductor. It's free. It's approximately free. Costs as much as a Band-Aid, cheap. And so everyone is sequenced. Everyone understands it. The whole big driver on semiconductors was Moore's Law, where the price of a semiconductor dropped in half every 2 years. The price of sequencing is dropping in half every 6 months. It's going 3 to 4 times faster than the thing that revolutionized computing. In 2012, we had a really, really fundamental, it may be the most profound scientific, certainly it's the most profound scientific breakthrough of the 21st century, but certainly of my lifetime, which is CRISPR. Scientists can go in, look at all the DNA, pick out a gene that may work, may not be working, and take it out. But there are big ethical issues, right? So think about what that means, right? So now we can gene edit. And by the way, they have done in plants and animals tons of things, right? They've got a mosquito that doesn't carry malaria. They have a tomato with no seeds so that you don't need to pollinate it. They've got a goat that grows extra long hair for cashmere. They've got a pig that's super muscular like Arnold Schwarzenegger so that you get more meat. So the really interesting thing is, what are you going to do with humans? This, I think, by the way, is going to be the big ethical question of our time. I think this will be the abortion debate times 10, which is we now have with gene editing the ability not just to fix you or me or my kid, but you have the ability to shape the human germline. You can actually affect evolution. We no longer have to rely on random mutations and the normal variation that you get in reproduction to run a breeding program, either for plants or animals or for people, right? In other words, instead of doing that gene therapy on me, we do that gene therapy on sperms and eggs, and now we can change permanently who we are as humankind. That no fundamental technology breakthrough has ever sat on the shelf for long. And it's only a matter of time before someone blinks.
Wow. Okay. So let's
You see why I thought it was important?
Yeah. Sorry. There we go. Now got that off. That's scary. And I'm surprised that people who were sitting in the audience didn't like say something or I would have said something. I'd have been like, excuse me? I mean, you know what I mean? Because like he's laying it up. Oh, this is the ethical question. This is the abortion debate 9 times 10. Like he knows.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because what does that mean for Black people when y'all done spent centuries telling us that we are 3/5 of a human, that we are, you know, animals, that what does that mean for Black people? So y'all can permanently just get rid of N-words? Like imagine we can just get rid of them. You know what I mean? Like that's what I hear.
Yeah. I mean,
but
and
then,
again, this was in 2018, right?
And so the people at the top
know what's coming. Now, have you heard any eugenics or like ethical based conversations around genomic medicine and in all of this in the past 2? No, it's off limits. We're not allowed to talk about it. And again, this is an academic presentation in a university context by a very influential, wealthy man who's a trustee for these labs and a venture capitalist who are creating markets. And we're not talking about it. And we're not like, meanwhile, there's a lot of conversation around identity politics, right? But how is it that this part, this whole huge missing elephant, is not being discussed?
Well, because I think the identity politics is the distraction.
Yeah.
You know, and I say that because, like, clearly to me, I'm like, y'all not changing the material conditions. All y'all doing is like, it's a marketing campaign. Black women this, Black women that, and they are using their money, so they're using their wealth to like write checks to certain Black NGOs, and like, you know, you're on the cover of, you know, Elle magazine, and I'm thinking to myself, none of our movements were about that. None of our historical movements were about that. None of it.
Can you show one of the pictures, one of those creator
pictures? Oh,
yeah,
let me do that.
I think that actually, that kind of sums it up.
Yeah, let me go back and find that. Okay, let me hit share.
Because again, like this, going back to the conditional cash transfer and also eugenics and birth control, is that we don't want those people, we don't want those people, you know, taking advantage of our resources, right? We want to manage it. And so, you know, I've often said from a social impact perspective, it feels to me like for both the finance deals and for the inversion, that they want Black and brown women to make this digital aberration. Like they literally want them to create the metaverse, which is that, like, the CIA wants Black and brown women to build their prison. Only it's not positioned that way, right? And so, you know, I was just checking today on my YouTube channel, and this came up, this image, and it so clearly says to me, so the actual like, pundity, like connection to land, like the creative force of Black women is being channeled into here. Make some digital content. Why don't you? Right? We're going to be busy engineering in our test tubes and our things. You're this Gattaca future, like, and so like you don't actually need to make babies anymore. We'd prefer you not to make babies. Like we'd really just like you to make some good, you know, NFTs that you can sell, right? And we'll pay you in what? Digital flowers you can put in your digital hair.
Yeah.
Like it's just, it's so grotesque to me, like of what it actually, you know, yeah. And again, like it's hard to unlearn the liberal, like I have to say, like as a like conditioned liberal, formerly liberal white woman, like to get the whole birth control, to understand what it actually, like it was a much more nuanced discussion. And because, yeah, you're not supposed to know about the eugenics part, right? You're not supposed to know about that. But here, we're gonna give you some assistance that allow you to live, but we're gonna manage your reproduction. We're gonna manage your food intake. We're gonna manage you for the metaverse. And but we'll develop some influencers, and we'll put this out, and we'll make you feel like you're represented, that you know your identity matters. That's bullshit.
Exactly. And yeah, like this is us being distracted by a marketing campaign. This is what it is. This is a propaganda marketing campaign where some Black people are being funded to, like you said, build this digital prison, build the metaverse, and it's being sort of propagated and, you know, shared with our community as a form of liberation.
Yeah, and I would just say, like going back. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, you go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, and I think, you know, it's been easier to use women because, you know, over the last several decades, there's data that shows that, you know, especially in the Black community, women have been outnumbering our men in colleges and universities to the tune of, I don't know, 7 to 10. I mean, you know, the men are not really matriculating through colleges and universities in the Black community, but our women are, and they're coming out and they're being, unfortunately, weapons against the community. I'll probably, be canceled for saying that, but many of them are being weaponized against their own communities, unfortunately.
And I don't think people are meant to know the bigger picture.
Right.
I mean, I think that's, and I'm no disrespect to people who are content creators and are authentically feeling like that's their gift and that's what they're trying to share. But I think this idea that somehow a STEM career or a STEAM career or this is meant to feed the global brain. Like literally, this is meant to feed this global brain. And it wants authenticity, and I think it wants Blackness. It wants that in the AI. Like that's what it needs. It needs that next. It's got enough step counts. It's got enough personalized learning programs. What it wants is that. And I think in many respects, the other piece of this, which I don't have a representation, but with piezoelectric, there's human piezoelectric energy harvest, where they're using nanomaterials, both embedded in smart environments and tech and wearable clothing and in biological systems, that I think within the wellness context, that there are many wellness programs, especially because of the disproportionate chronic illness in Black communities from stress, from lack of access to good food, from, intergenerational trauma, that there are these chronic illnesses. And so they're going to be promoting like Black women's wellness groups, walking groups, running groups.
It's already happening.
They're going to totally give you a smart uniform and a smart workout clothes, and they're going to have Black women power the metaverse. It's a sick inversion. Like it is like, what is your labor? It is an inversion of everything, and it's sickness. And again, no, people should totally be able to get together and like walk and whatever, but not in this program, not as an impact market, not as a smart surveillance program.
Yeah.
And they can't see it because people don't know. You're not supposed to know about piezoelectric human energy harvest. You're not supposed to know that the Kellogg's that are back in the UBI programs are like arch eugenicists. You're not supposed to know any of those things. You're not supposed to look back. You're just supposed to look now, today, this moment. What's the newest NFT? What's the newest, spin in social media? Stay in this moment. Don't think about anything else.
Right. I really wish the folks in our community who are into the NFTs, who are into the crypto, again, look beyond today. And I think you said something to me earlier, Allison, like you said, this is an electrical engineering simulation or something like that with people.
Yeah.
So it's an experiment, the whole crypto.
Yeah. Well, so the one thing that actually I got out of, because I knew a lot of what they were already talking about at the Mormon Transhumanist Conference. And I would encourage people to go, maybe we can even link to the website because they have the talks up now, you can see them for free, was that Scott Stornetta, he was one of the speakers. And he and his colleague, and he's a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, back in the 90s, he and his colleague at Bell Labs in northern New Jersey developed the first encrypted decentralized ledger.
Wow.
And he said, and again, I have friends who are a member of the church. So this is not slam. I don't think they know, right? It's like, I'm trying to tell all the people not to build this, right? I'm trying to tell the black women not to build this, Israeli mothers not to build this, the LDS moms not to, we don't want to build this for any of the children, right? And in the meantime, we should have some reckoning with a lot of this history. But what he said was he was very glad to be there to be able to speak about his accomplishments within the context of his faith practice. And so I have to think that if more people in the crypto space understood its origins, and again, not that any religion is inherently bad, but no one is imagining crypto as a faith-based project.
Right. Thank you, Awa.
Nobody's understanding that.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not trying to drag on people, but you don't know the full story.
Right.
You don't know the full story. And the cybernetics, do you mind if I read just one paragraph? It's called Social Polarities. So
Social Polarity. So you're reading from the same book again.
So this is
go ahead.
Again, from the World Sensorium. This is right after they're saying, we need a world police, a world education, a world food program. And it relates to the electrical engineering, because the frequency, I don't think I got off track a little bit on the frequency weapons, but it's not just directed energy, it's carrier waves. And they can use light, they carry information in frequency, in sound frequency and in light frequencies. And there are frequencies that we can perceive with our senses, but on either, it's only a very narrow band that we actually have access to. It's beyond either side of sound and optics. And I feel like they're using frequencies in the built environment and frequencies from devices and all of the small cell transmitters that are going in to deliver frequency. And, you know, my friend Cliff, he's helped me understand a lot because he's worked, you know, in sort of different realm spaces. But he said, when you are listening, not all of the things that you hear as your thoughts are your thoughts.
Oh, wow.
There is this noosphere, there's noetics, and there is frequency. And he always says, like, when you're experiencing something, like, think for a moment, it may not be your thought. It may be a thought that is passing through you. Jesus. Do you choose to engage with that thought, right? Is that a kind thought? Does that thought kind to you? Is it kind to the world? Is it a dark thought? Because a lot of people get caught up in darkness, and these things are being transmitted in carrier waves. And it may
Does that explain the mental health crisis that's currently happening? Are they inducing this on purpose?
My one talk that got bounced off of YouTube was actually about nanotechnology and optogenetics. If you look into optogenetics, and they're working on things like synthetic programmable hallucinations.
Oh my God.
And yeah, that was Dan Novi, his 2019 dissertation at MIT Media Lab, synthetic programmable hallucinations, a boundless mixed reality. And so, you know, and I don't know how much they're blowing smoke, how much of it is accurate, but I do believe that there are things that we can tap into the sacred natural energetics, and not from a woo-woo kind of like, but there is something out there that is sacred that we all have access to. We have access to the story of life in the universe and good things. And they are trying to corrupt that, and they are trying to overlay their own intermediary system onto that. And in Salt Lake City, actually, when we went up to the Alta Ski Resort, because the Alta Ski Resort is the site at which they planned out the ARPANET, now the internet, in 1967. And in 1984, it was a key meeting of the Human Genome Project, both at the same place.
Wow.
And, you know, I actually just put up a talk where I was talking about there are ties between Disney and the church. And the University of Utah actually is a pioneer in graphic design and file compression software, which is the metaverse. So I have like a 4-hour talk about Alice in Wonderland and Disney and the Utah Teapot, which is kind of overwhelming. But the frequency, they're using nanoelectronics to self-assemble with frequency. And again, it's mad science. It's this.
You got that right. This shit is crazy.
I mean, the Army training TRADOC, the Army Training Resource Command Center, like they have a mad scientist division, you know, and when you find that, you're like, oh my gosh, and that's the stuff they put out. TRADOC has its own YouTube channel for mad scientists. So, but in the electronics and the social polarization, because I think they actually generate power for their agenda. It's the Hegelian dialectic. It is a polarity. And so they use fracturing narratives to polarize the energy they need to advance their agenda, right? And that's why, again, I appreciate that we can bridge, because it's in the bridges that I think will neutralize the polarity that is driving this thing. So, social polarities. This is Oliver Reiser. What we have urged is this, that society can, quote, get ahead only if it develops a head. Our appeal for cephalization, that is, that society must develop a world brain to serve as an organ of collective and unified action, is based on the general idea of biological dominance and subordination, which in turn is an example of polarity in nature. Oh, you know what? That's not even actually... Oh, okay. We previously mentioned the need for producing a balanced, dynamic, spiraling movement. Think about spin. In the new electrical engineering, it's all spintronics. That's the new thing. It's all spin. And you think about how often we use, oh, it's being spun, right? They need the spin. That's their power. They're harnessing their power. We previously mentioned the need for producing a balanced, dynamic, spiraling movement towards some magnetized objective. It is in such concepts as planetary good health that scientific humanism finds these objectives. Planetary good health, right? Perpetual pandemic management. Such a broad planetary polarity might well serve as the catalyzer which could project into the fluid solution of world culture the magnetic pattern of a global society, cohering the parts and dispersing the current patterns and anti-humanistic vectors. And so to me, that sounds very much like engineering, like electrical engineering. And I feel like their narrative will say, well, we will get rid of racism by just getting rid of race. We'll just get rid of race and we'll just all be unified in this fluid magnetic solution of, spin. And that'll solve the problem. We'll just all live in the metaverse. And,
well, I mean, they're starting with gender, if we want to get controversial a little bit. We're getting rid of gender as we have known it all of our lives, at least. And to me, I feel like the next logical step, they couldn't start with race. It just would have been shut down, right? Yeah. But now that gender has been just about fully sort of, it's not a thing anymore. It's yes, it's not a thing anymore, right? Then of course the next logical step is going to be transracial, and then you're just going to get rid of race anyway. And then somebody's here saying, well, race is a social construct anyway, which is why I feel like that whole race is a social construct that came up about in the 70s and 80s didn't really catch hold as much, but it is now. While race, people can say it's a social construct, it actually has material consequences on people's lives. I mean, that's a fact.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, so you can say race is just a social construct. It was made up by Blumenbach, you know what I mean, to separate people and divide people so that they could easily conquer people. Right. But now, since that system has been in place, it's been continued to perpetuate literally for centuries, where there is actual material consequences to race.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing I want to add on to that, beyond like the immediate consequences to people's lives, which are very true. Drew Hempel is one of the people that I found, I encountered around looking into the World Brain Project and this, Reiser and Stulman. And he had actually been working on it back in the early 2000s, so 20 years ago. And he was in the Twin Cities area. And he was he came to it through a music theory standpoint. And he was working in Qigong too. So he has it's very interesting mind, very brilliant person. His frame is all about math and things that I don't actually understand, but I know he's onto something. Like when people find me and they're like, I don't know what she's talking about, but she's onto something. I feel that way for Drew, is that his analysis was that at some point in classical antiquity, around the Pythagorean theorem, there was something mathematically that went wrong, that went counter to the natural world, and that bifurcated the classical antiquity from the people who didn't follow that path, which is more Black and brown people, Africa, India, that stayed within that situation. And there was a disharmony that was installed that I think in a certain respect carried over from a frequency standpoint, a cultural frequency standpoint that reverberates today and magnifies across the centuries. And so, which causes those direct implications on people's lives and people's, their ability to live their lives with autonomy and agency, for sure. But to me, that's quite fascinating, because if you situate it that way, then we have a responsibility to look at that and figure out, okay, how do we reharmonize without erasing the past, like with acknowledging the past, and then how do we, because I feel like in some ways, the people that would go to war against this thing can only imagine total destruction, that the world will end. And then maybe in ending the world, something will come out of it. I don't know. And I think there's a sort of a masculine power to the people who I met. Like, it will never be fixed. Nyla is just done. Let's just destroy it all. But I think from the feminine side, if we could say, how do we heal this? Not that it's any small thing, but like, could we start to heal? How could we start to reharmonize in that way? I feel like, not to put the work on the Black community, but like to actually model, but not an authentic model, not a digital woman creator model, like not that. That's not the model. They're steering, they're continuing to steer us off the wrong direction. So anyway, I mean, I'm trying to do my part to talk about this within a predominantly white community, left community, saying like, this is what I think it is. But we have to get to a point of collective awareness to start to make the change. And there's a lot of noise.
No, that's right. Yeah, Dwayne, you're right. I mean, being a social construct doesn't mean it's not real, but usually when you hear people throw up, because I hear it a lot from liberals, when you hear people throw up, well, race is just a social construct, I have never heard anybody say, well, the USA is a social construct, ever.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, you're right. But think about that. Like, people don't say that. Usually when you're trying to dismiss, like, people talking about the real material consequences of race, people are like, well, it's just made up. It's a social construct. Like, get over it, kind of thing. I've never heard anybody say, but the USA is also a social construct. I've literally never heard anybody say that.
Well, I would say it's not exactly in that framing, but a book that really influenced my thinking, and I often reference it, is Stephen Newcomb's book, Pagans in the Promised Land.
Pagans in the Promised Land.
Pagans in the Promised. It's very important because, again, this smart, open air prison surveillance state is equal parts enslavement and indigenous genocide. Like, it's the bookends of what America is. And so I feel very much that these smart cities are based on a reservation plantation system, right? I mean, sadly, but like now for everybody, right? But Stephen is Shawnee Lenape, but I think based out of California. But he has spent his adult life literally reading the papal bulls, going to Rome in Latin and dissecting the language, because all of U.S. property law is actually Indian law.
It's what law?
It's all Indian law.
Wow.
It was Indian land before it was U.S.
Of course,
but it's based in the papal bulls, and those bulls, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg was still referencing the papal bulls, I think in 2005, a case to disenfranchise, I can't remember, it was the Oneida nation of their land. And they're like, oh, too long ago, sorry, missed out. That doesn't, but she cited the papal bull in her argument. So again, liberalism, right? But Stephen, I mean, essentially his frame is that, it is a social construct. It's a legal construct. It's a legal fiction that was meant to dispossess the original people of these lands, sovereign nations, of their land. And now we're all about to be, dispossessed into the metaverse. But again, framing it in such a way that identity politics has all of these different marginalized groups leading the way. Look at us.
So true. It's so true. This has been great. We've been on for a little over an hour. What are some, I guess, final thoughts you want to share with people? You've dropped a lot of links. We've shared like your YouTube channel. We've shared Wrenching the Gears, so people can actually go and read a lot more about sort of your writing and see your YouTube channel, because there's a lot. I mean, if people I'd encourage you to follow her on Twitter. She's not on Facebook anymore, unfortunately, but she's on Twitter. And these are Allison's top picks, right? So the world. So this book is also was referenced in this talk today for people who may just be joining. And then she just referenced this book. So we're not.
I would just say,
go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Just in closing, I want to be clear that we're not supposed to put the pieces together. Like, no, and individually, it's hard to mobilize against this. So I think sometimes people imagine when I assert like these findings that I'm here to cast blame on people, right? That because there are many people who are wrapped up in tech and biotech and things, and they're all trying to figure out, what to do about it, right? But we actually have to come to an awareness. And in my heart, I feel like it is a reckoning with our past, and not from a woke, like polarization frame, but literally, what are we, right? And where is this going? And we could actually unify if we could understand that this is AI against all of natural life, that we stand in the breach between the children, the unborn, the plants, the animals, to say no. And knowing the ways in which these systems have continued to oppress and chew up and spit out Black and brown communities, indigenous communities, the natural world. Like, this is nothing that's new, and we just have to come to terms with it and then figure out how we collectively fix it. But the polarization to say, Allison, you're a white woman, you should sit in the corner and wait till we tell you what to do, that doesn't fly with me. And I'm not saying I'm here to tell Black communities what to do, but I need to tell white communities what to do, because who's going to tell them if not like crazy women like me? I know, and I can't shut up about it. So, I'm not blaming people. I'm not here to shame people into inaction. I'm here to say we together can start to heal this thing, but only if we're willing to actually look at it.
Right. That's exactly right. No, nobody's telling you to shut up here. I mean, because very few people within the community are even talking about this stuff at this level. You know what I mean? People are still recycling old ideas, and I look on Twitter, I look on, all the social sites. We're fighting about identities. You got Black people fighting with Black people on the continent. We're fighting with Black people from the Caribbean. Like, there's so many division markers where people are literally spending their time on social media fighting other people that look just like them, and other oppressed people. Let's just be honest. Like, so the oppressed, like, we're fighting among ourselves, and they're continuing to move with this digital world, slavery, 10.0, right? Like the literally they're perfecting slavery is what's happening.
Yeah.
I mean, and the slavery is going to be for everybody, and like you said, except the uber wealthy, the billionaires, right? It's not going to be for them, right, but it's going to be for everybody else.
Well, I see that talk to whites first mostly, but I'm here to provide intelligence. What you choose to do with it or not do with it, that's up to you. I'm not here to tell you your game plan, but I can channel pretty well where things are going.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you don't have to trust me. I'm not here to tell you what to do.
Right.
But there aren't many people. I would love to take a break and have like 500 other people all centering this part of the narrative, but it's not happening. So right. It's 2 years later into this, and it's still not happening. So, just thank you. Thank you for your time, Zakiya. I appreciate it. I appreciate your audience, and, we'll do it again.
We'll have to do it again soon. No, I appreciate you. And thanks so much for always being willing to share where people can go to, like, the primary sources themselves. Like, like you said, they don't have to believe you, but go read this shit for yourself.
Decide, what does it look like to you? I would love to be wrong. I would love to be wrong, but on all of my the talks, I've been putting the slide decks, and on those I have the source links. So
right.
Knowledge is power. They don't actually expect for us to talk to one another.
Exactly. They don't expect us to talk to one another. They don't expect us to be as diligent as you have been, like in the independent research that they leave out there for everybody that's in libraries. It's sitting there, right? And it's like you said, they're creating an open air prison, for everybody. So
for everybody. That's the thing. And if we understood that, everybody, then we could do something. And that's when people are most dangerous, is when they're united.
Right. Yeah, and which is why they have to keep us divided, right? Like, so which is why you'll get like a Trojan horse of there's going to be something on Twitter that's going to be a new thing that's going to have everybody up in the uproar. I think a couple weeks ago was Will Smith slapping Chris Rock. They talked about
Yeah,
that shit for 30 years.
spin, keep everybody
Spin,
spinning.
keep everybody distracted. Like, I don't care about that. Like, they want to keep you distracted talking about that type of shit, but we're not talking about them building this, you know, digital prison.
Yeah. And like where it came from, right? I mean, to me, I'm much more interested in looking at Jeremy Bentham. Where did this come from? Because I'm really convinced it came from, like, a lot of this is rolling out through the Quakers. You know, that's part of something I'm going to be working on next. But like impact investing, right? They're going to sell it to you as peace and justice for sure.
Yeah.
Join the global brain.
Yeah. The global brain. Damn. That's what it is.
No.
Yeah. All right, Allison, we'll have to bring you back again soon. This has
Thanks
been
for
great.
your time, Zakiya. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks so much. We'll see you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye. Take care.